it's not for us to dictate where this work is going. We're building the systems and utilizing the technology to create the conditions for change, and hopefully biasing that in a trajectory that is beneficial, that gets us towards that flourishing. But we've built this in a way to bring people into this. And for me, that's some of the most exciting stuff. It's engaging people on a journey where they get this thing where they're not being sold anything, they're not being educated about something, they just experience it and they go, cool, I'm super curious now, tell me more. And then you've got thousands of people on this journey.
Jonny Douglas, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. How are you and where are you? On this amazing, it's the day in July where Uranus goes into Gemini, and I'm sure you're not into astrology particularly, but for those of us who are, this is actually the start of some quite dramatic change. So this feels like a good day to be exploring something that is both based in the land and based in AI and computers and tech, which is the whole Uranus thing. So how are you and where are you today?
Hey, Amanda, I am in a gradually awaking, trying to be sunny Sheffield in South Yorkshire in the UK, the wonderful city where I'm from, on the edge of our glorious Peak District. And it's the start of the week, and I don't officially kind of start my normal hours until lunchtime on a Monday. So I always like to take the first half of the day of the week to gather thoughts and gear up to jump back on the roller coaster, ready for the twists and turns that this week's circus has to bring. So this conversation is, yeah, a perfect fit for that.
Ah, we're sneaking in ahead of work time. I had no idea. And you were woken up very early this morning by a cat that you were cat sitting. So we have complete sympathy for that because small furry alarm clocks are a good thing when they're on time at the right time and not so good when it's 3 o'clock or whatever time it was. So thank you for coming on to here. You and I spoke a year ago, more or less, at a conference in Sheffield, and you explored with me or explained to me the evolution of the River Dôn Project. And it was and remains one of the most exciting things I have heard in terms of the capacity to build community and build community within the context of reconnecting with the web of life. So we're going to explore this today. Tell us, to begin with, how you became involved in it, particularly how you became involved in Opus, which is, we now talked to James and Deb and now you. So tell us about that.
I will do my best. It's yeah, a fun, interesting story that with a lot of the work that we do at Opus kind of fairly nebulous. So I guess all of this is kind of centered in sort of terms that the that listeners will be well versed with in terms of the problem frame of the Metropolitan and Perma crisis. So kind of just acknowledging that it sits in all of that, and how I guess nature and our relationship with nature is entangled with those different types of crises that are kind of complex and inter-affecting, which makes them difficult to understand, especially when we're kind of looking at how the desire to make an intervention might actually move from A to B or further. And I think whether you kind of lucky enough to have the time to spend engaged with this work and think about it or not, I think we're noticing a lot more now that these crises are making people feel very disconnected and isolated and often a bit kind of helpless. And we've been told about this stuff for years, so it's kind of built up over a long time, and it kind of shows up in people as concern or anger and frustration sometimes, a lot of confusion. And it kind of leaves us asking those questions of how we have come so disconnected to everything, and how we've lost maybe some of our purpose or our sense of help, sort of self or belonging, and how we've ended up with this kind of situation of the natural world on life support, basically. Um, and I guess that kind of unravels in a number of different ways in the context of the systems that we have, in that we kind of have a world that is only valued in our economy by an ability to extract from it, where, as Indy would say, kind of a dead tree is currently worth more than a live tree in the way that it's thought about and valued. and where any sort of impacts on the natural world that we do have and the living systems that support us and we're a part of aren't directly sort of accounted for. They're externalized and excluded if they don't kind of need to go on the balance sheet.
Yeah, if they're not part of the market economy, they don't count.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're poisoning things, as well as it's not just that they don't give us something, it's that we can poison with impunity. I understand that we just crossed the seventh of nine planetary boundaries in the recent months, so there's only ozone and aerosols left to go, which is
Yeah, yeah.
extremely frightening because it's
We
not even on life support. Life support suggests something active is being done to perpetuate the health of whatever it is that's on life support, however bad that might be. And we're not. We're actually accelerating the harm, except in areas like Sheffield, where you have a project that hopefully can at least balance out some of that, if not push it back a bit.
Yeah, I unfortunately had to update the website recently from when we'd first set it up because it originally said we have crossed six of the nine planetary boundaries, and now we've crossed seven of them, and people often joke about kind of this idea of sort of Doncaster or Sheffield on sea because in a UK context it's probably the furthest you can get away from it. But we're all intimately connected to the oceans in a way that I think some people know, but we don't always consider, which is that every second breath you or I take comes from the ocean because it's where 50% of the world's oxygen is created. And as uncomprehendibly sort of terrifying and overwhelming that is, we're kind of all inextricably linked to that and interwoven with it. So yeah, we kind of have to engage. And I think that's part of where I think people end up with all of that narrative of that overwhelm because you kind of realize, oh, okay, I've got kids, nieces, nephews, family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and I don't really want them to suffer. And if you truly sort of believe that there is no hope, then what you actually have to do is kind of shut the hell up, never speak another single word of complaint at any point ever about anything. And who's going to give up that? Because surely it's one of the top five favorite pastimes of most people is to complain about stuff.
Yeah,
So
but we
you
don't
kind
give
of,
people options. It's not just that not complaining is an option. It's until we've given people motivation, agency, direction, empowerment, until they have a sense of where we could go and how they could get there. What can you do except denial, deflection, despair in that order? Nothing's happening. Okay, something's happening, but it's China's fault. Oh my God, we're all going to die. That's the sequence because nobody is offering, hey guys, here's a bunch of things we could all do together, and our lives would feel better while we're doing them, and the outcome would be a world where our future generations might actually thrive or even survive. So, but the River Dôn Project seems to be doing this. It's creating community around a bioregion while hopefully improving the overall ecosphere within the bioregion, human and more than human. So tell us a bit about how it arose.
yes, I think that is kind of where you get to is kind of tell me what to do or where can we possibly start. And I think it the project is centered in this idea that water and rivers connect us all. Um, and kind of connections why we're all here. Like we're biochemically wired through billions of years of evolution because we all come from the same place even before we were kind of human beings. And and I think what we're trying to do as a kind of, for want of a better phrase, like a sort of a headline description is we're trying to build some civic infrastructure that helps people maybe get to some of that doing, which sounds a little bit fancy, but we're not really doing anything new here. Like we're not selling anything really. And Joe spoke so eloquently on a few episodes ago about how kind of we've lived in a bioregional context for 99 point something percentage of history, basically like nearly all of humanity. And where we've recently, let's politely say, lost some of that and connection and now things are suboptimal. Perhaps a
You're
little bit
being so
worse than
kind.
it's a little bit worse
We
than
are
that.
hurtling the bus towards the edge of a cliff from which there is no return, and the sixth mass extinction could happen. There have been
Yeah.
five. There's nothing to say that there's something special about us. I did have someone on the podcast who said there were no billionaire dinosaurs, which is true. But they didn't need to be because they had a perfectly valid and viable ecosystem that in which they all thrived. They didn't need to be billionaires. And I don't think it matters how many tins of beans you've got in your amazing bunker in New Zealand. If the oxygen falls below 50%, you're going to struggle. It's not going to be a fun world. And total collapse of all complex life does not really allow for people in their bunkers, I don't think. So yes, I think we
Absolutely
can
not.
state
It's
this really clearly.
it's horrific. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with this is you you kind of have really no option other to go all in, but where do you start?
Right.
Because the idea that even if you kind of look back and say, well, I just didn't know what to do is not an excuse.
Hmm.
But that decision needs a starting point, and that decision is going to be so that starting point in having made that decision is going to be different for everyone. And I think the work we're trying to do is create enough breadth and depth in those sort of stepping on points where so that we can meet people where they are.
Right.
So in building some things to help sort of create the conditions for change, because it's very hard to orchestrate change, but you can create the conditions for it, and
Yeah.
you can create some experiences and opportunities around them that allow people to start their journeys and begin to navigate their way through it
Yeah.
with some sort of hopefully increasing alignment along a trajectory that moves us from that mutually assured destruction, which is absolutely where we're heading, careering towards at an accelerating pace, to one of mutually assured flourishing
Yeah.
and start to get their heads around the fact that they're, although we don't deal in solutions or binaries, they are the only two options because anything in between those is just a delay
Yeah.
of where we're currently headed towards.
Yep. Kicking the
So
can down the road, which and it won't work very well. I think you're right. We don't want binaries, but actually this one is not a bad binary to look at. We either go over the cliff or we don't. And if we don't, it's because we've got a world that is better for everything that is alive. So yeah. So what are your
absolutely.
principles in aiming for that? If you're trying to say we can't make people change, but we can hold a space in which change can become visible and possible and desirable. What are the baselines that you work from, you Johnny and you Opus, as you're beginning to curate the River Dôn project and where it's going?
I think it's or everything that we do, I think is underpinned by sort of some foundational sort of principles of acknowledging the fact that we maybe don't know the answers, and unless we understand the problem better, we're never going to have a chance of mitigating the worst effects of where we're already on a journey to. And that in in trying to think through that, we have to accept that we almost have to take the next step because we're confident enough that it's in the right direction and we have trust and faith in the people that we're working with on that next step, and then deal with the ambiguity of not knowing fully what comes after it. And that's not a blind step, but each step ahead when you're looking forward is less visible the further away you go from that. And that you have to adapt and change really quite quickly. And if you come to a point that something's not working, you have to let it go and sort of compost it. In very much like everyone at Opus has kind of read probably multiple times Hospicing Modernity. So it's always thinking through, and we've had Vanessa at some of the events at the festival this
Oh, brilliant.
week.
Her new book, Outgrowing Modernity, is coming out in August, which takes
Ah,
it even further. I talked
fabulous.
to her last week about it, so yeah, it's exciting.
Brilliant. Yeah, she's absolutely amazing. Um, And I guess the other thing which makes this quite hard, I don't know this principle, but it's kind of acknowledging the fact that anything that is going to make an impact or hopefully get some change is going to be at least as complicated as the problem.
Or
And
complex.
yeah, complex and complicated and interwoven. And
Yeah.
and therefore we need to do you kind of try to find channels and threads to move things, but actually you need to move lots of things forward because they are so interconnected, and it's not just coming across a kind of bump in the road on one thing, it's how that interconnection can affect all of those things. And I think on reflection, that's probably why part of my journey in arriving here has happened. So you had it as a special edition on the podcast, the event that we had with Kate Raworth and Inda Johar and James Block from Opus. And at the start of the event, they all described themselves as a recovering something. So economist, architect, and poet. And I was reflecting on that, and I think I would describe myself as a recovering product designer. So I started in the world of design, but because I was always fascinated by how things worked from a very young age, and not just how they worked, how they were made, how they were brought into being, like how you understood people's relationships with things and stuff, and how those bonds were formed, and then that branched out into wanted to learn more about people, and I got into some sort of teaching and training, and but it never kind of felt enough. And the idea of moving into sort of fast moving consumer goods and spending ages designing a washing machine, I was like, what the hell is the point in any of that going to be? And I've done kind of some fun things along the way. So in learning how those kind of experiences and affected and connected and sort of engaged people, I've helped others try to understand that. I've taught at universities, I've compared events and been part of event series. I've been sort of lent into some of the design work and sort of built custom offices where you're trying to tangibly sort of build the environment that affects people and how they connect to it, and seeing how that brings people together. And the need to thread narratives even when you're kind of making the sofa connect with the coffee table, or the kind of elements of that, how all of it is underpinned by these narratives and threads and stories. And got involved in running some kind of event series. So the Pecha Global Series, if you've ever heard of that, it's a kind of 2020 presentation format that started in Japan. We ran that for 10 years in Sheffield, and that was all about curating experiences and showcasing, platforming what other people were doing. And we ran my business partner, a good friend, started something called Sheffield Soup, which is like a live crowdfunding platform. So how do you bring people together so that citizens and kind of communities of people are funding by sort of putting their own little stake into other projects? And we got wonderful things like the Food Works in Sheffield that started from collecting a couple of boxes in a hatchback into having an army of 600 volunteers and 3 pay-as-you-feel cafes and 6 electric vans, and intercepting, I don't know what the current stat is, like 25 tons of food that would otherwise end up as waste. But that was funded by people telling other people that their idea was good, and some kind of music festival stuff as well, because I think music is such a powerful way of bringing people together. And and that kind of Oh, and we also did a really big sort of community, multi-million-pound sort of trying to buy a grade two listed Georgian mansion, which was a 6, 7 year project and wonderful and a nightmare at the same time.
And did it work? Hang on a minute. Did you glancing over that? Did you get the
We got
Georgian
down to
mansion?
the final two, and the count. It's a public asset because it was council owned, and they decided to be better off as a care home rather than something that was supporting a community of 300, 400 people and making sure that people didn't have to go into care. So yeah, fun experience. But all of
That's a
that
whole
led.
other conversation.
It
Okay,
is indeed, but all of that kind of led me to Opus, and it kind of
right.
all makes perfect sense. And there was kind of this kind of idea of bringing people together in alignment, like while doing all of that work in Sheffield, like the Opus team were doing some of the early stuff, and we were kind of connected and going to like got
Right.
made connections and friendships, and they were doing sort of different and similar events and stuff. And I guess sort of leap forward a few projects and years, acknowledging that the pandemic changed a lot of things, especially for us. I mean, in terms of sort of business speak of pivoting, like the entire organization changed from
Right.
2 weeks before the pandemic. And I think a lot of this stuff that we're now a little more versed in had come up as interesting questions and discussions at the Festival of Debate. And we were sort of becoming more aware of the work in New Zealand and increasingly the work in sort of
Tell us about
Ecuador.
the work in New Zealand, why it's relevant.
So in New Zealand, using I suppose that there's a connection there with sort of common law but the kind of indigenous rights where they had representatives kind of engaging in getting the river recognized in
Yeah,
terms of the systems within
yeah.
the
Getting legal
country
personhood to
and
be a
moving
thing.
towards that, yeah, kind of rights for the river and legal personhood. And I think that's where some of our thinking started, and we've not left that behind, but I think we think a lot more in terms of what that enables and facilitates as the next steps rather than how do we get this? Because,
Right.
well, I mean,
Yes.
who do we trust with that kind of stewardship in our sort of global north UK context? Because that indigenous rights framework isn't really there.
But also, we live in a world where human personhood is being demolished. If you're the wrong color or speak the wrong language in a large part of the Western world, namely America at the moment, you are likely to end up in a concentration camp in Florida. And so, how likely is it that had rivers been given personhood in the US, that would still be a thing? Whereas what I'm feeling with the River Dôn Project is the legal status of the river doesn't matter if people are engaging with it as an integral part of their community, then it has personhood by default, which struck me as an extraordinarily exciting potential, particularly if it could scale up around the world. Just before we go there, I noticed on your bio on Opus that when you wrote your bio, your main focus was UBI, Universal Basic Income. Is that a thing? I don't necessarily want to talk about it now because I really want to talk about the River Dôn project, but is that still something you're focused on? Because I would really like to talk to you about that sometime.
Yeah, yeah. So my rough split of my hours of 4 days a week at sort of two-ish Riverdon and two-ish UBI Lab Network. So
Okay, let's not go there
uh
now, but
no,
sometime.
I mean it is a component on this story. So yeah, let's
Right.
not go there, but it's probably just worth acknowledging that it in in the work building and campaigning and trying to make change in that space by having a decentralized autonomous network and finding ways to meet people where they are, engage them about what matters, and how that explores the way we value things and our
Right.
relationships with each other, and
Yeah.
how basic incomes obviously provides a particular type of response, but it's centered in this idea of everybody's time being valued and everyone's
Mm.
contributions being valued, and how the market doesn't value those things, despite the fact that the entire market sits on this foundation of unpaid care work that's somewhere in the region between, even if you paid at standard minimum wage, £1 and £3 trillion a year. And then the market doesn't value it, but it can't exist without it. And I think it seems separate, but it's been part of the journey here and some of our experiences of how you do that work, but also how it 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 comes from this place of care
Hmm.
and acknowledging the value in that care and putting people in a position to give them the means to have the time to care.
To care. Right. Brilliantly. And to care for themselves, each other, and the web of life, which are the three fundamental kind of brackets of living and being. Okay, that would be really interesting, and particularly if we get onto the river coin, which is, of course, something extremely exciting for those of us who are totally geeky. But long before we get to that, let's go back to the River Dawn project,
Yep.
what it is and what it aims to do. Just the highlights of the technology, really, because this is a technically based. I think it's worth saying. I know I am a total geek, but even so, I think it's really exciting that what we're doing is creating technology which is evolving by the minute because AI is a thing and is evolving exponentially. And Daniel Schmachtenberger says the thing that will destroy humanity is our incapacity to embrace the concept of exponential growth because our brains are wired to linear growth. However, exponential growth in the capacity to connect with this river strikes me as a really, really interesting and good thing. And so, if the AI that is connected into this is growing exponentially, which it is, then the project, the depth and breadth and capacity of engagement will also grow exponentially. So, let's have a look at just before we get there, one thing that I will otherwise forget. The River Dawn has a circumflex over the O. I know of no other word in the English language that has a circumflex anywhere, actually, never mind over the O. And I don't actually know many European languages that have circumflexes over O's instead of I's. Why? Why does it do that? Do you know?
I know a bit of this story, but it's not my specialist area. So
Okay.
it's
Can
a
you give us an
nod.
edited highlight? It's obviously not an English word.
It's a nod to the river gods of
Oh, okay.
Danube. So
Hmm.
it, there's a really good explanation of it on a slow radio
I'll find
podcast
it.
that we were a part of
Okay.
called Wild Medicine, which we can share the link for. But
Okay.
yeah, there is a whole story behind it, but it's to do with the river god Danube, I think.
Okay. So are we look going back to the ancient kind of Proto-Gallic of the UK to get the O?
I guess so. I think,
Okay, not your thing. That's fine. I'll look it
yeah.
up. I'll
I
Google
mean,
it. It'll be there.
it's one of the interesting things about, and we will absolutely get to the technology because I will geek off over it as well. Like
Good.
my role in this is the kind of like, how do we
The
build
design.
stuff and how do we engage people within it? Like I love the theory. Like I love listening to Daniel. I love listening to Indy, and then I'm just like, cool. And now we build
Yes.
um, quick and dirty prototypes and get it out there and start engaging people. But the Don connection. I'm very aware that most people won't necessarily know what the Don is or where it is, and there's
Okay,
more
go
than
with
one of
that.
them. There's one in Scotland, there's one in Russia, there's a number of them. So the Don flows through all four parts of South Yorkshire, which is where the kind of the region that Sheffield is in. So there's four local authorities of Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham, and Sheffield. We're very fortunate we kind of sit on famously seven hills.
Like
But I
Rome.
think the interesting thing about that for me, yeah, there's the Rome connection, but it also means that people are seeing things from a constantly changing perspective in the place that they reside. So they're getting these alternative ways of looking at things. So I think the idea of engaging with something or looking at something differently is
Is
built into our
integral to the
DNA from,
geography,
yeah, from the
right?
topography and the geography. And Sheffield has a very strong connection to rivers, which I know a lot of places do, but it's particularly strong in Sheffield because that topography and those assets lent itself to providing the power that sort of the industry was born out of and lating the cooling for that. And yeah, I mean, for better or worse, Sheffield has kind of shaped a lot of the world. But we do also have a lot of green spaces. We've got a lot of trees. So we're one of those places that claims to be the greenest city in Europe, but our metric is the number of trees per capita head. There's lots of different ways. I think there's
Right.
37 cities across Europe that also claim for one
Okay,
way or
each
another.
measuring their statistics slightly differently to put
Yep.
themselves at the top of the pile. Whoa, lies,
Yeah.
damn lies, and statistics. I love it. But it is good. And you're right in the edge of the Peak District, which is God's own rock. I used to come and climb in the days when I was a climber living in East Anglia. We used to just drive up and spend all day climbing on the Peak District, get back in time for work on Monday morning. It was gorgeous. It's beautiful, beautiful rock. So yes, you're right in the middle of beautiful countryside with a lot of think reasons to love it. And listening to you, Sheffield clearly has already, before the River Dôn Project, got huge numbers of highly intelligent people really working on how do we build community in this space. And then you've got the River Don, which at one point I heard somebody say was the longest river in England, and the people on the Severn, on which I now currently reside, go, no, no, the Severn is longer. So there's probably lots of different stats on how you measure the length of a river too, that we won't go into. But it's 146 kilometres, which for the UK is a big river. I realise for North America that's a stream, but but for us that's a big river with a big catchment that covers the whole of a politically relevant geographic area.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like you say, there's brilliant work being done by people on the ground, like the Don Catchment Rivers Trust are working sort of helping and supporting the salmon, removing weirs from some of that industrial context and building ecological interventions, doing the river fly tracing, liaising with those kind of stakeholders as they're probably described, and the Sheaf and Porters Trust doing kind of getting sections of the river deculverted, holding developers to account so that when they're submitting their planning permission, people can have access to the river and cleaning it up and running all this stuff around that. And then River Stewardship Company and Revolution actually doing the work on the ground, cleaning and maintaining the waterways. So I guess we kind of have all those jigsaw pieces, and we've got the Sheaf, the River, and Loxley and the Porter flowing into the Don, and that connects, like you say, South Yorkshire and about 1.4 million people. So Opus, with its experience, as it kind of probably moved into this area and sort of saw that we weren't doing that much ecological stuff, but it was increasingly obvious that we should contribute to this space. We got the networks that sat in that space sort of well thought and found and worked with. So it was probably about 2022, the end of 2022. Alban, James, and myself thought it'd be a good idea to sort of pull a small band of rebels together for a little adventure. Um, and I mean, I guess just sort of calling back to the context for this at the most grounded level, this work is to do with that reconnection with the living systems that are currently on life support in the region and our rivers, food systems, and landscapes. And those living systems of the environment and nature aren't separate from us. They are our civic life. They are what we're a part of. Hence the sort of civic infrastructure headline. And I guess what we're seeking to do with the project is to reframe that relationship with the river from one of separation and control to one of interdependence and hopefully into becoming and foster that culture of stewardship where acts of care are distributed and coordinated across civil society by citizens and everyone else rather than being some sort of this is what you should be doing and you're going to be told off if you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you're doing it because you care. It's fostering care again, and that sense of falling in love with the world, and and feeling a sense of being and belonging and meaning and purpose related to the world that we live in.
And also I suppose acknowledging the digital tools that are useful to lean into to facilitate that, but never making it about the technology, using the
Right,
technology as a medium to get us to places.
right.
And thinking about the governance models, and as you would imagine, this is a lot where we're fortunate in working with Dark Matter Labs and their amazing thinking, but also then the cultural narratives that sit within that and how we address this complexity at a bioregional scale in a way that I don't know. Human beings can only intellectualize so much. So I think personally, a big part of this is the only way you can connect with this truly is to feel into it,
Mm,
because that's using all your subconscious systems to process this stuff how you would do naturally.
yeah,
But we've got to build almost the bridging part that helps people reconnect
yeah.
with them because they are so often overwhelmed by the technology and the things that are stealing and hijacking.
So just a
And
second before you go on, if I've understood what you just said is people need to feel their connection with the web of life, and in this case, particularly through the vehicle of the river. And what you're doing is, without telling their heads that this is what they're doing, is creating the space in which that feeling into connection both is possible and is desirable. Is that more or less what you just
yes,
said? Okay,
and
sounded good.
also the experiences that go with that, because if you go on a journey with someone to do that, it's a lot more meaningful.
Right.
And
Everything is
and
better
it kind of
collectively.
leans into that, I guess, this idea of what we mentioned before about, I mean, just the language of personhood is problematic, right? Because it's us with the nature and dominion of our existence that's causing harm. So we're not we're trying to move past the personhood. We might use it for what it facilitates, but actually it's how do you connect with this thing? And we talk of it in terms of complexity and all this other stuff, but it's the stuff you feel when you just stand and the breeze blows past you. Like that's
Yeah.
you feeling into a complex web of life system
Yes.
when
Or
you
you could
hear
just
the
go on the
trees and
website and
birds.
look at the picture of someone who's put up a heron. You know, there was a heron at this weir and it's got levels of certainty and it's absolutely certain because I can see the heron on the picture. 100% certainty there is a heron here. You think, oh yes, if there's a heron, that means there are fish and that means the water's clean and my head does all that, but my soul responds to the heron. And it's and the magic of that and everything that 300,000 years of evolution of connecting to hunter and hunted and seeing the heron as a part of my lineage and my being. Anyway, go on. Right, we need to talk about technology. I'm aware time is moving on. We haven't even begun to move to the tech. Let's geek out a bit. Tell us what the actual project, what the tech does.
So the technology tries to bring lots of things together and hold it in a space that allows people to engage. So, like you say, with if you've got what do they call themselves? Twitchers that love to go and watch the herons. Like they are intimately connected to the river, and they have a parallel intimacy and bond with the river that a third generation angler does. That's someone that goes canoeing on the river, that someone lives on a houseboat. So as well as we're trying to kind of make everything visible and use the technology to surface what's there, we're also trying to create the synergy between people that already exist, because that enables us to get to the sort of 13 to 15% of your tipping point of your population that's engaged, that gets you to the early majority, and then you can move through your kind of curve of change. So we've got a number of strands of technology, and that sits within a wider range of threads of work. So we've got a sort of legal and policy kind of area, because we need to look at those governance systems, and we've got the arts and culture kind of strands that we work closely with Amy and her team, and Lauren at Sheffield Hallam, because that's the stepping on point. That's the engagement piece. You don't want to be told information, because if information was the way that we fix things, then we wouldn't have a climate crisis in the first place. And then how we use the technology to interweave those things together and bring those communities together and make those connections. So the first big piece that we've built is the engagement platform, which we can put in the show notes so people can share. And that's kind of the first phase of a way of surfacing and visualizing what's happening. So we're pulling some hard data sets that are publicly available, so kind of flow rates and water levels from the
The
EA
rainfall
and
in the
rainfall
catchment area.
monitors.
Yeah.
And then all the water companies in the UK are obligated to bring monitoring, live monitoring of their assets online. So we will be hopefully be able to draw, because they've got to be publicly available. They'll be adding kind of turbidity, pH, temperature, and things that would be very, very expensive that we originally thought we
Okay.
might have to try and fund. They will be
Okay.
being brought online.
And these are
We may
relevant
need to,
because they're indices of the health of the water. So you can get oxygen levels or contaminant levels, presumably, will be in there.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I think they're going to be in the region of kind of 5 to 8 sensors per array.
Wow.
And I think for the Sheffield, South Yorkshire context, they're probably going to have to put around 2,000 sensors in the water, because of a lot of them, they have to monitor them upstream and downstream from wherever the asset is, to test the difference between
And
what
an
might be.
asset is a fancy word for this is where we pour sewage into the river, right?
Yeah, yeah, or yeah, kind of outflow pipes, CSOs as they're called, or treatment plants and other elements of where kind of rivers join and connect and stuff like that.
Okay.
So we have the potential to off like add quite a we've built it in a way that we can add layers, but it's designed as a map. So an interpretation of the worlds that you experience, and people can have a play with this, but you can zoom all the way down to the street level. And when we've had this out on the exhibition stand, when we've done some of the engagement, 50% of people who try it go, can I find my house on here? Like, they
Yes,
need to
exactly.
connect with the bit that means something to them.
Right.
But you
And
can
it's
also
basically using
twist
Google
it.
Maps. So you can look at people's houses because Google Maps does that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think we use the system. So Hive IT, technology partners, have built this on something called Mapbox. So it's not quite satellite, but it's scaled, and you can see the boxes and the buildings, and they're all done at the different heights, and you can twist it through 3 dimensions. So you can really look at it from different perspectives. And we built all this in terms of geolocation. So you can put on the map the bit that you contribute, the bit that you value, the bit that you see that you want other people to
So
see.
your picture of a
When
heron is where you saw the heron. Yes.
Exactly. And when you pin it, that pin then has its own URL.
Right.
So you can share that with someone, and all they have to do is click on it, and it will take them onto the platform all the way down to the bit that you want them to see. So it creates this kind of feedback loop.
Right.
And that's the kind of base layer of starting it out. And we've created the opportunity for people to share appreciation of kind of nature on there. We've created the opportunity in categories for them to report harm
Right.
of kind of dumping or sewage or pollution. We've created the ability to report invasive species,
Okay. So
and
here's the
we've
Japanese
created the
knotweed
ability.
that
Yep.
I think I see. Right. Okay. And then people can people then sign up to be, I'm very good at, I don't know, clearing Japanese knotweed. I would like to come and help. Is that a thing?
Yes. So the River Stewardship Company and Revolution, that's kind of what they do. So we're in conversation with them about applying for some funding to build the back end that allows them to put their maps of where it is and where they monitor it
Okay.
because actually in pulling people together to do that, it's more effective for someone to go in, make an intervention, and then 6 months later go back in and cut it back down again because that does
Okay.
the best for holding it back.
Right.
Whereas what happens a lot of the time is people go, oh, where has it not been done? And they go out and
Right.
make an intervention of where it's not been done. So again,
Right.
connecting people with the doing that results in something, and it creates a feedback loop that hopefully means they'll come back and do more.
Okay. But as soon as the AI knows that, I mean, GPT at the moment, you could say, this is the case. Please let us know. Please highlight for us the places where it's already been done and tell us in 6 months' time when we need to come back. That, for AI at the moment, that would be a trivial bit of programming. You only just tell the AI and it would do it.
Yes. So the way that we're looking at kind of using the the artificial intelligence side of things, and I think it's really important to just sort of acknowledge that we are worried about the water and energy that that uses
Okay. You could
and the
use
privilege and the
DeepSeek instead
bias.
of chat, but yes. Okay.
Yeah. And the privilege and the bias in the dominant narratives that usually surfaces within that. And but we're at a phase of kind of testing and learning these systems and then and basing them on existing systems. And then our ambition is to move to a system that we've built ourselves, that we've probably positively biased intentionally with inputs and our data sets.
Okay, so given that I've just been talking to Vanessa, who has got Aiden, which is a subset of ChatGPT, and she is looking at Indigenous people in the Yukon who are building their own servers and endeavoring to have the servers be but a part of a regenerative system. So are you looking at that level of it being our own, that we're, I don't know, got hydro units on the Don that are going to be powering our own servers to power our own AI? And are you starting from scratch with AI, or are you taking an offshoot of an existing AI and training it with our values?
So that is our ambition. The storyteller, as we call it, is a river storyteller, which is again, it sits alongside the platform. So at the moment, we're working out the relationship between those two things. So as we've workshopped through this and we've built the platform, which took us about 18 months and significant investment, and that's all been built to be usable by others eventually, but we've got lots of layers to add in. And we want to create those layers so you can switch them on and off. But it's also been time coded so that a future iteration of the platform, you will have a slider and you will be able to move backwards and forwards through time so you can see how things are changing and things are being affected. So we're using the technology to give you an insight of the interventions that are being made to see whether they're getting better or worse. So without getting too technical, the way we hold that data as a data set, that lots of people can contribute to that, and the platform visualizes and surfaces that encourages others to submit more data. And you can do that in a
Go
way.
get to the end of this. Then I have a question. Go on.
Sure. So you can do that in a way of contributing pictures, but you can also contribute memories and heritage and stories and poems. So all of that data will be held in a way that others can experience it and discover it by directly invitation because they've been sent the link to the pin, or because they're looking at where their pin is and they can see what other people have pinned. So they get the cross fertilization. So that will contribute as a layer of data that the whatever form we take the AI in will draw on as one of its data sets. So as the platform visualizes and surfaces the information that is put into a data common, so it's owned by the people and potentially with legal personhood and a trust and a bank account, maybe a self-sovereign river. And this leads to, we kind of alluded to earlier, the work with the kind of the Riverbank and Emily Harris and the brilliant work at DML. Like you've got to hold the data somewhere and you've got to create that reciprocal feedback loop so that it's building those things, and then you can start to create that pool. And if the AI looks on that, what we'd like to do is yes, draw on some of the technology, but if we can build something that works as a prototype, we can then work out how we positively bias and influence and shape some sort of model, and then we can work out how we energize that model in a way that means that it's not causing harm to the thing that we're trying to use it to help and facilitate. But it unlocks this ability, I think, in a future iteration where you can take the barriers to interacting with this complex and complicated system out of the way. So if you're walking along and you've got your earphones in with the river, you can be experiencing nature while having a conversation with something that's maybe been kind of set up to respond to you like you're having a discussion with a philosopher or an elder or something like that. But it's drawing on the hard data sets that have been fed in. So it can tell you about the health of the river. And the river is the litmus paper of kind of the health of the entire bioregion or river catchment. But it can also go, oh, we're just walking past a point where someone submitted a poem about this section of the river. Would you like me to read it to you? So you can interact in lots of different ways. And then the third element that starts to make things even more interesting is so DML have created the kind of prototype of this brilliant living stewardship agreement kind of system that's all about sense making around these relationships, because it's not just about surfacing these relationships, it's about not acknowledging what they are and then being able to make commitments to them and then sharing those commitments so that we're getting these reciprocal natures of how we work together to steward ourselves onto a better path. So they've built a system where it's kind of prototype form, and it was actually funded because Xu Yang and Fang used to work with Audrey Tang in Taiwan. So they got a bit of chunk of money from the Taiwanese government, and they've built this system that allows you to look at the relationships with more than human actants within a system, and you walk around with your phone and you look at it and you start to think about things from different perspectives.
Why do you do
And what
that?
that hopefully, sorry.
Because why are you thinking about things from different perspectives? Because the AI is responding and telling you, here's a poem or here's a heron. That's helping you think about things from different perspectives. Otherwise, why are you doing that?
Well, it's really important in us trying to get to a point of stewarding
Hmm.
and being in a position of responsibility for stewarding the natural world. So part of that way in is to think about things from different perspectives and to play this forward again, future iteration phase of the project, but we're holding these kind of data sets and technologies separately so that we can create the interaction between them and constantly keep evolving and developing them without them being dependencies. But let's say that you are a third generation angler and you've been stood in the same section of the river for years and years and years, and you're really interested in a certain fish. You're offered this opportunity to think about the world through the perspective of the interface for care and this living stewardship agreement because you care about fish and you're thinking about, well, how does the fish live and breathe and breed and travel through this river system? And then we've got these hard data sets that are feeding in all sorts of information, but you elect that the bit that you're interested in is from the salmon's perspective. So the temperature of the water or the turbidity in it or the dissolved oxygen might not affect you as a human being, but you connect to, as an angler, caring about how that might affect the salmon. So you're starting to think from things from a different perspective, and you might, as we move into the commitment making and you caring about the bit that you're already connected to, which is why I say we're not selling people anything. We're just allowing them to reconnect with something in a more meaningful way that helps them branch out into doing more things with it and connecting with other people that might be doing similar things but for a different reason. So you say, I want to be pinged alerts on the system when the temperature spikes and it affects the salmon.
Right, right. So let me just unpick this a bit because I think we're heading into language that is not immediately obvious. So visualize and surface means nothing to me except I already know what it does. So people can go to a website, and at the moment there's a bounded area which is the catchment area of the River Dôn, and they can explore the website, and there's little icons for natural things that people have seen, like a heron, or invasive things that people have seen, like knotweed, or here's a poem about the river, or here's a story about the river, or if I'm an angler, here's the place where I have been fishing, and my granddad was fishing, and his granddad before him, and here perhaps I could look in and see the salmon population 100 years ago was big and the salmon population now is tiny. And could I then talk into my phone and say, okay, River Dawn, tell me why the salmon are not swimming past here so much? Or would I have to know that in advance? Tell me a little bit about the actual practical application of me as an angler. My granddad taught me to fish, and I'm standing there and I've got my fishing rod and I'm not catching anything. And I want to know why. What do I do to get to that? What's the actual logistical? What do I type it? Do I speak it? What can I ask? What will it tell me?
I mean, I think our ambition would be almost like when you get that annoying chatbot that appears on a website when you're trying to get to speak to someone in customer services and
Right,
you know can't
right.
get
But
there.
it's
It
not
would
annoying
almost be like
anymore.
that. So
But it's
if
lovely.
you're on the platform, yeah, if you're on the platform or the interface for care, it would almost sit over the top. And that's why we're keeping these kind of things separate so that we can integrate them into a meaningful experience to people. But
Because
you
I, as an angler, I don't care that it's a data set and an AI. I just want to know why the salmon are not there. So
yeah,
let me just also unpick. There's a basically a very, very large spreadsheet, complex and highly complex spreadsheet that can be accessed depending on what the queries are. And there's an AI. And these two at the moment, the AI can access the spreadsheet and put in its own queries and extract its own information, but currently they are two separate coded units coded separately. Is that what we're saying?
yes. And
Okay.
the engagement platform is built and out there and people can play with it. And
Yep.
the storyteller is work in progress, starting getting it up to a point where we can prove it, where we can get the funding to bring in.
Okay. And the storyteller is the AI.
Yes,
Okay. Well, I just need to make it clear for people for whom this is not
absolutely.
immediately
Yeah, no,
obvious.
no, no.
So
This
at the moment, you
the
can
further we
access
go
the
in, the more
database.
complicated it gets.
Yeah, for sure. You can access the database. It's out there. We will definitely put a link in the show notes. I totally encourage people to do it because the point for me is this is the River Don at the moment. But at the point when this becomes available, it could be anywhere in the world where you can get a map. It could be the hill here. And I could talk to the hill about the trees, and presumably at some point we can get soil sample. Anything where you can get the data. If I were to take 1,000 soil samples on my hill and put them in, that would be available to people who are interested in the hill and the number of red kites and the number of worms in the soil. So it could be any ecosystem. It doesn't just have to be a river, but it definitely could be any river in the world once this becomes available. And then whatever data you have, oxygen levels, fat levels, sewage outflow becomes available to anybody for their living ecosystem. So Joe Brewer was talking a couple of weeks ago about the fact that there's a river in Colombia where there's a coal mine and an oil well, and they're both pumping crap into the river that's poisoning everybody. At the point when this becomes available, everybody who lives on that river could access the fact that, say, the gold mine has just opened its sluice doors and chucked a bunch of highly toxic material into the river. And at the point when you know that and know when it's happened and who's done it, you have agency, I think. Yes? Am I making sense? And is this true?
Yes, I think absolutely it is. And also you could sign up for alerts when that was happening. So if the river needed you to go and gather evidence of it, then you could go out and you could take photos. Um, and and there's also further evolutions of this. So one of the things we're pursuing at the moment. So we have a lot of kind of partners in this, which I'll kind of mention in a bit because they've been fundamental in getting us to this point. But we've got access to this precipitation radar, so high resolution precipitation radar that looks up at the sky and we can see where all the rain is falling. And it's in the care of the University of Sheffield at the moment. So we work with the Sheffield Urban Flows Observatory and we work with kind of engage with the Grantham Centre. And what we're trying to do there is if we've got a site and it's already signed off, it's got its permission. So if we can put a precipitation radar with a kind of 100, I think it's got 50-kilometer radius, so it will look over the whole of the catchment area. We will get real-time information of every single drop of rain that falls on the catchment. Then if we can go in a further phase of the project to include saturation sensors in the catchment, because it's how the water flows through the catchment before it gets to the river, especially when we're talking about kind of the perma crisis reoccurring kind of 10-year flood every 6 months or however it
Yeah.
is
And industrial farming creates concrete soil, whereas regenerative farming is like a sponge, and that would be visible
in real
immediately.
time.
Yes.
And it would also mean that you can be a bit like how you don't feel connected to the ocean. You could be miles away from the river and you could put a saturation sensor in your garden or in your kind of local park, and it feeds into the system, which creates a real-time model. So we got to think about how we kind of tap into different funding because as kind of you're aware, the 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 capital and funding and investment into demonstration of alternative futures is starting to flow, but it's not quite there yet. So if we could tap into some flood defense money and you've got a real-time model of how water flows through the catchment, it's not only your ability to understand where they normally go, it's knowing the saturation in the soil. So you know the point in which it's going to get to 100%, it's going to start flowing over, which means you can start to model how quickly the water is going to end up in different places, which means you can respond with whatever resources that you have. What that also does, and Albin loves this kind of example, when you used to study from textbooks and you used to look at the water cycle of how it falls from the air and it goes to the ground and it evaporates and it goes back up, that envelope that's not just the bioregion this way, it's the bioregion that way, encompasses everyone, and they realize that they're all intimately connected with everything in this space.
So for those not watching the video, this way and that way, we're horizontally and vertically. So yes,
Sorry, yes, I
so you're
forget.
getting a view, a three-dimensional, actually a four-dimensional because you've got time involved. You're
Exactly.
getting a capacity for wherever you are to understand this at a visceral level. This is back to what you were saying of it's not intellectual, it's how it seeps into the marrow of our bones and then our brains make sense of it. And we're going to feel the connectedness because a lot of people they may have seen the water cycle when they were at school, but it didn't go in and they don't care. But they'll care when there is or is not flooding happening and where there is action that can be taken, and particularly long-term action of, okay, let's do lots more regenerative farming because then the water will sink in and it'll take a lot longer to reach 100% saturation and start flooding. That's that's a no-brainer once you can see it happening around you. And particularly if you've got your little friendly chatbot AI that's talking to you going, well, we're now at 98% saturation in your garden, but because you've been doing all these changes that you and I have been talking about, I the chatbot, you the person with the garden, it's soaked up considerably more than it would have done this time last year. And if we do these other changes, it'll soak up even more, and then there will be less flooding, and then your friend who lives in the valley will not have to move out of their house and be rescued by a rowing boat because it's flooded again. And that kind of narrative, you can set up a chatbot, an AI, that will talk to people in those terms, which should be easy. If Elon Musk can tell Grok that it needs to start referencing the Heritage Foundation as if it were a good thing and not a bunch of white supremacists, then we can create an AI that actually understands that the way that you garden or farm is making a difference to whether the valley floods or not. That that's
Exactly. And
straightforward.
you can take that to the point of helping people understand how if they put like a little insect house or they grow these kind of wildflower flowers, that helps with the soil. And so it connects not that in as well. It's not just kind of,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to dig a hole and put some gravel in it and try and create a
Yeah, or I'm
soak
going to
away because I don't want to
compost.
do that to my garden. It's
Yeah.
how the insects and the birds and everything is connected too. So when we were
Yes.
talking about this idea of how do people get into this, you meet them where they are. What
Right.
incentivizes you to put a saturation sensor in your garden? I'm not sure. You might want to know whether you have to water the garden or not because you can never tell because you're not experienced enough, but you're trying to get into gardening. Maybe we could incentivize an insurance company who has commercial assets and domestic assets to incentivize, like you, if you put a monitor on your car or you take the gym membership, you get reductions in your insurance premiums. If you
Okay.
put a saturation sensor in the domestic context, you get a reduction in your premium because actually the insurance company is helping protect their commercial assets, which are in the valley at the
Right.
bottom of the water catchment.
Right. Right.
There's
And that's
incentivizing all sorts of different ways in
yes.
people can connect into this. But
Right.
that
And it gets the
also van
insurance company then knowing that it's got an influence on things, which is
yeah,
huge because insurance companies have been factoring in climate change for a lot longer than politicians because they have the capacity to realize that they're going to go bankrupt if they don't. So you're beginning to create functional change in actual human beings. Because one of the things I'm realizing is that who have to wear suits to work often they don't intend to have very linear, narrow thinking, but the way that their job reinforces their thinking means that it's linear and narrow. And actually, they would quite like to be able to have open, wide boundary thinking, but their job doesn't allow it. And now we're allowing business and markets to begin to have more wide boundary thinking, which feels also quite useful. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were about to say
No,
something
no.
else.
Yeah, no, you're entirely right. And I think those in like, I'm not praising the system or trying to do the kind of tweaking to the system, but it's how we find that the bit that really interests me. How do we find ways for people to engage with this rather than feeling resistant to it? And if you've got the insurance company on board, you get to engage with the business. And rather than the business doing some kind of half-assed attempt to engage with this or just straight out greenwashing, then they go, I get a reduction on my insurance premium. Therefore, I want to engage with this. And actually, we are going to send some people genuinely out into the community, higher up the catchment of where people are, and we're going to help them do this stuff because it protects us getting flooded and losing the ability to take money off people for 4 months while we have to do the renovation. And then they're engaged with it. And then they're engaged with it at a person level because people have gone out and talked to other people in the community. So you remove the kind of systems and the structures of the things that make stuff go bad, and you connect people with people. And those people are making a change, and they can tell people that it makes a difference, and they tell other people. And hopefully that's where we get some of that engagement growth. That means it becomes a self-perpetuating system because we don't want to be at the center of this. We want to facilitate this work and enable other people to do this work. And then that takes us on a really interesting journey of, okay, we've modeled the flooding here. Isn't that really interesting? Everybody gets it. Right. Now we're bringing in the citizen science stuff. We're looking at the kind of chemicals that are going in the water. We're starting to connect all these hard data sets and we're starting to dial in some of the kind of brilliant work that they do at the Kniven Institute with the sense maker stuff, where they're taking people's stories and bringing people's narratives and keeping the efficacy over them. And the AI creates in a positive way because we've got this commons owned. This is something that's helping and supporting me, not extracting from me, storying data set that sits alongside the other data sets, which starts to feed into this incredible body of work that allows people to engage in richer and more interesting ways that contextualizes the citizen science, that makes everything transparent. So if the water companies bring online all these sensors that are obligated to make publicly available, we get these really rich hard data sets and the warm data sets and the soft data sets. And you've got this incredible system that however, it doesn't need to be a huge language model. It doesn't need to know everything because we're actually trying to use the AI to engage people and get them to doing. We don't want the AI to provide the answers. We want the AI to facilitate based on the commons own data that people are contributing. They see the benefit from it to reintegrate that. And that gets us to some really interesting models where you could make a digital twin of the Don. So you've got something that exists online that seeks in real time that you can just go, I want to look at the entire catchment in real time for what's happening with oxygen and pH and all these different data sets that are held elsewhere that people can bring on as a discrete layer that you can switch them on and off if you want to look at them, or you can just sense and speak into them by going, tell me about this. But you've got this real-time model that means that you get to a system that's so effective when you're getting to the, I suppose, higher levels of the traditional hierarchies of how we decide what things are going to be and not be in our environment. You have to consult with that. So the planning department of developers who have got lawyers consulting and them going, oh, we can't really litigate against this. Don't really have to. Let's sit down. Let's put your thing here and let's see what it does.
Okay,
Because if
let's
it
put
causes
another
harm,
hypothetical chicken farm and watch the disaster that's going to happen, and then everybody can go, okay, that would be a really, really bad idea. Let's not do that. Oh, I want this locally.
we're working on it.
Because otherwise it's a bunch of people going chicken farms bad, and the people who are have got huge amounts of money lobbying going, no, chicken farms, no harm at all, trust us, and they win because they have huge amounts of money to do the lobbying. And this would be, I can I can imagine people trying to contaminate the data sets actually, but that's because I'm a fiction writer and that's what I would write in the fiction of this. Is the people with huge amounts of money do not want this to happen. And how do you maintain a distributed autonomous data set? That's a whole other podcast. And I'm aware of the time. We're now over an hour, but I really want to look at something that you suggested last year, which was that the river might have the capacity to issue a river coin, which would be blockchain based. And we would need again to look at blockchain. Presumably that's Ethereum and not Bitcoin blockchain. Let's not go too deep on that because we'll lose people. But you have the capacity to issue a coin which has a floating and independent value and is therefore not linked to the fiat currency, which in this country would be the pound, and therefore is not within the taxation system and becomes a signifier of stewardship and another incentive to do things. First of all, am I right? And second, can we discuss it if I am?
Uh, yes, acknowledging that I'm not an expert, I would highly recommend, as we've mentioned,
Talking to
Emily's
Emily.
podcast on this and
Okay.
other people we could bring in. We're having some really interesting conversations with the Regen Foundation in the US. So Austin and the team, they're building some of the tech stacks that do the
Oh.
representation of this. I happily introduce you to them. They've got some really
But
interesting
for
thinking. We
most
just haven't.
people listening, that the depths of that would fascinate me, but we will lose people very fast. So let's just talk in hypothetical terms of I am a person who has signed up to be a river steward. So the database and the AI know that I am a river steward and the AI has my phone number and can access my phone. And let's say, so my hypothetical is the water company yet again opens a sluice gate and floods a huge amount of sewage into the river. And there may be cameras or sensors or something that are going, this is not good, but they need to have an actual human being check. So they ping everyone who's within a certain radius going, panic, river not good. And I go, okay, I'm here. It's okay. You guys can all stand down. I'm going to cycle over to the river and I'm going to look and go, yes, that just doesn't look very good. Okay, yes, you were right. And as a result of that, leaving aside the political, legal, and community implications of the fact that the river company has yet again flooded sewage into the river, I get a river coin for being a good river steward. And then I can go to the local community and I've got river coin, which is worth precisely nothing unless people decide that it is. But the local tea shop might go, okay, our scones, by the end of the day, we haven't necessarily sold them all. We can't sell them tomorrow because health and safety says they're stale. You could come in at 4:30 in the evening and have a scone and a cup of tea for your river coin because we like you and we would like to support the river. Or somebody else says, nobody swims much at 11:30 on a Wednesday morning, so you could come in at 11:30 and come and swim in our pool for an hour for a river coin. Or somebody else says, when the gates close for the football match, the tickets are worth basically nothing, but if you've got river coin, you can come in at 5 minutes after that for your river coin and you can watch the match. And so a river coin becomes worth what the community wants it to be worth. And you have a unit of currency that has status value. And assuming that the people who are into cryptocurrencies don't decide to bid up its value because it just exists and we can keep it out of the currency markets, you have a local currency that has local value that then becomes, I would like to earn a river coin. So I want to do good stuff for the river. What can I do? Maybe I can go and cut down some Japanese knotweed that the AI is telling us 6 months ago was cut down and now we need to cut it again. And I earn another river coin. So we have something that begins to create engagement. First of all, is my narrative accurate? And second, is it likely to happen?
I definitely think it's accurate as a component part, as the more traditional kind of, from what I understand about it, kind of transactional nature between the individual and the system. But I think because we're able to sense into the complexity and get these commitments, there's actually a collective element to this. So how you make collective interventions. So not just my transaction for getting the coin for the thing that we did or the token or whatever it represents, but how and this is again probably another podcast, but the work that Citizen Network, who we work with, are doing in terms of the decentralized nature of neighborhoods and how you flow capital and investment into neighborhoods and the financing facility that I'm sure when you have James back on, he will tell you all about, that we bring that in. How does that potentially connect with people coming together to make interventions through like this kind of philosophy of care? And therefore, can you bring communities of people that might be geographically together to make those interventions? Can you bring communities of kind of lived experience or interest together to go, well, I just don't want to pop in and get my coffee or whatever it might be at the local cafe near where I fish. But if I come together with other people who fish, how do we make interventions on this? And then we start to sense into lots of different, because once we start to hold this data and everybody understands that it's theirs, you can look at it, interpret it, and sense into it in lots of different ways. And this is partly what the SenseMaker Canivan Institute does. You can like you gather the stories, and then you can like almost like you've got a multifaceted ball and you can look at them from different perspectives and understand different things about them. They're not just this sort of get what you measure thing. You're building the richness and complexity of the data. And I think with some of the tech stacks that the Regen Foundation are building, they're kind of exploring that was the initial sort of decentralized blockchain thing. What else can we do with this stuff? And it's not my area of expertise. I do geek out about it, but it's kind of how do we build the models that lead to that? And with all of this, sometimes it can seem a bit far-fetched, but the sequencing is there step by step. And we're working on the first component parts and prototyping the second component parts. And we're workshopping this all the time to bring in how this fits together. And we're working with the kind of knowledge bases at Sheffield Hallam University, more the arts and cultures side for the University of Sheffield. DML obviously are kind of always so generous with their thinking and knowledge and resources to feed into this, and they donated the code for the storyteller.
Oh, did they? I thought it came
Yeah,
from
so they
Audrey.
built the storyteller for a river in Taiwan.
Oh, they did.
We were
Right,
exploring it, but
right.
obviously it was in a different language, and we actually just prompted it in English, and it spat out a pretty good English response. And they were just like, "Oh, kind of does work in English as well, then."
It was doing its own Google Translate in real time. I
Yeah.
Everything you just said sounds hypothetically brilliant, and I didn't understand what most of it means in actual terms of what real people might actually do. Can you give us a kind of story of, however far-fetched, of maybe 10 years down the line, of what it is you're aiming for? Because I actually can't picture this in my head.
Um, so it's kind of to create a lattice or framework that people can engage with, meeting them where they are, and building the systems that create the conditions and facilitate them engaging with that to do this distributed commitment making, and then building the systems that can influence the other component parts that almost need to come together to meet the people that want things to change where they are and facilitate all of that happening. So the technology allows you to engage for your personal individual area of interest or story, and that contribution hopefully offers a route into engaging more and coming into this work and listening to brilliant podcasts like this and reading the stuff that DML put out on Medium and kind of going, I want to understand the bigger picture because I now see my place in it where I am, and therefore I have a starting point to take this journey with you rather than standing back and going, how the hell do we do something about this? But all of that is to work through to getting to not just swimmable rivers, but drinkable rivers. Like that seems such an alien concept right now. But it's possible if we
It
make
wasn't
everything transparent.
impossible 200 years ago, was it? Every
No,
river was drinkable.
but
Right.
I think it seems uncomprehendable now because we seem
Yes.
so far from it. So we almost have to decentralize and distribute this onto the ground where people are, and in engagement with the institutions that are doing this great work. We work with so many kind of researchers and scientists that are fascinated by this idea because they're like, I can take my little thing that exists in a silo and I can make it relevant and contribute to the world. That would be amazing. I've dreamt of doing that my entire career. Tell me more how to do this. And you're getting citizens and citizen scientists who are going, I walk my dog by the canal every single day. I can help with this. And you're giving people a way to connect with this kind of seemingly impossible, ludicrous thing. And that's what I think we're trying to do, if that is kind of enough of a sort of through thread of the story. And we're drawing the technology in to facilitate that progress towards that mutually assured destruction, steering to mutually assured flourishing. But everybody's getting their own little benefit. They get the, I think so much of is lost where people contribute something and then they're just like, well, what happened to the bit I contributed? Like, I signed this thing, did it change? And this is designing in those feedback loops that hopefully engage people to engage with that.
Okay. Alrighty. And in terms of the river coin and my model of a person who's been a good steward and got something, I'm really trying to get my head around, because it sounded like what you were saying was that there's a much, much bigger picture than simply earning a river coin and it being a similar transactional relationship to ordinary fiat currency, that we're looking for something more dynamic than that. And I'm wondering, so I'm a third generation picture, who also walks my dog by the river, who also lives halfway up the catchment area. Maybe I've got a small holding and maybe I can change the nature of the way that I'm farming and I can put some sensors in the soil. So was there, is, this is a genuine question because what I heard you say was, yes, my Manda's understanding was limited and there is a bigger picture and I'm trying to get my head around the bigger picture. So how is it, what is the implication for a person living in the catchment area who can do perhaps some citizen science, and perhaps their partner is also a scientist at Sheffield Hallam and their daughter is a single mother living in a high rise somewhere? How how does it interact? What is the bit that I was missing from the picture, really, that we could add in?
I'm I'm not sure it's missing. I think this is like we have to take certain steps forward and we don't want to predict too far. So I think there is definitely the element that you described, but there's also kind of other adjacent possibilities within that I think it's important to have the conversation about this idea of transaction and value sets and the way that we value things and interactions and acts of care. And I think that goes all the way from something like the blockchain decentralized distributed ledger of acts of care and that tokenization of that or representation of the importance of that, how that might scale together for people coming together to do things around different kind of more than human perspectives, because those more than human perspectives are going to kind of come into interaction. But on the other end of that maybe that continuum of this idea of transaction, and this maybe links back to where the personhood comes in. If the river as a complex system is recognized within the eyes of the law and you can interact with it, then can we use that to set a trust up? Because if it's got a trust, it can have a bank account. The idea that it has a bank account gives it the ability to transact on this side from the maybe the blockchain style stuff, but it also allows it to transact with the current systems in the ways that people recognize it. So you could donate to the river, or if the river was having harm caused to it, like you or I drive past a speed camera and a letter arrives on the doorstep, could the river issue the fine to the entity causing it harm? And could the entity causing it harm have to pay the river directly without any humans in between? I don't know, but it seems possible in my head. And also, if rather than as good organization as they can be with the kind of people leaving stuff to the
Yeah,
National Trust or kind
yeah,
of
or the donkey
endowment funds,
sanctuary. You could leave it
yeah,
to the river.
you can leave it to the river
Yes,
because there's a
yes,
there's a kind of vehicle
yeah.
recognized within the current systems that we have that can hold it, and that's maybe the barrier to it being
So we're
done right now.
developing an interface between predatory capitalism and a different way of being. This feels like a really important, this is the emergent edge of into becoming. This is how we transform the extractive nature of capitalism that is predicated on the commodification of suffering into a different way of value transacting that is instead and not even a commodification, but an integration with flourishing, which is what we need. I mean, everybody's asking, how do we get away from capitalism in a way that doesn't just crash it to the point where everybody starves? And this is a step on the way, and that feels really, really important.
I hope so, and I think as you've just described there, sort of things that we understand. What does it mean if the river is self-sovereign?
Yeah,
Is it this abstract concept, or if you can see it living and breathing, and you can see the complexity of the
yeah,
interwoven nature of all the modern human actants in real time,
yeah,
you can feel into it in the way that you want to feel into it.
yeah,
So your decision to donate to a Stewardship Solidarity Fund or a river litigation fund, or be involved in the conversations of how that money could be spent in order to help move us towards the flourishing and away from the destruction, you've got a reason to engage because the river being self-sovereign becomes meaningful again.
yeah,
And you never know, I might throw this idea out into the world as a possibility. The current kind of chief hat wearer of this country has a lot of interest in the environment before he took his most recent role, and the Crown Estate actually has a huge connection and ownership of a lot of the riverbeds or the river banks in this country. They're never going to sign
Right.
it over to someone, but would they consider
Signing it
gifting it
over to the
into
water of
a
the UK.
self-sovereign system? Because then
Right.
that is the higher power, however you might want to interpret it, than them. And that
Wow.
creates an incredible opportunity. And it's this kind of my little sort of theory of change cycle. If you meet people where they are from this idea of owning something, it's you can move them to responsibility, and then if you
Yeah.
move them from responsibility, you can get them into stewardship. And if you get them
Yes.
into
And
stewardship, you get them thinking further ahead to
yeah.
that indigenous framework of 7 generations. And the only conclusion from that is that the river needs to be self-sovereign because I won't be here to do the stewarding.
Right.
And that takes you from ownership to self-sovereign, but
Yes.
you can't
Yes.
go the back way around the circle.
Yes. Wow. Oh, that's very exciting because until halfway through that sentence, I'm thinking Starmer. Starmer had an interest in things. No, Starmer's an automaton. He doesn't exist as a separate entity from the people pulling his strings. But you didn't. You
I
meant
think I
our
think
current
Charlie could be
king.
enticed in.
Yes. Yes. And possibly whoever follows him because they all get it up to a point. That's an extremely exciting idea. I think that's probably a very, very good place to end. I'm just going to check the concepts that you suggested. Yes, which and the end was where this gets us to now and some possible alternative realities. Do you want to throw us an alternative reality, Johnny, as a fudgish, or was that your alternative reality? Because that was pretty good.
I mean, I think they are the things that are possible, and many other things. I think it's not for us to dictate where this work is going. We're building the systems and utilizing the technology to create the conditions for change, and hopefully biasing that in a trajectory that is beneficial, that gets us towards that flourishing. But we've built this in a way to bring people into this. Like, we've got the institutions, we've got DML, we've got the great people on the ground, but the work we're doing with them and the kind of rights of nature, we're part of an interdisciplinary network of study of the rights of nature, and we're bringing this. We hosted one of their sessions, but it's the kind of exhibitions and events that we're doing to create the conditions to bring people into this. And we do it at the Festival of Debate, but we did brilliant exhibition that was curated by Amy and Lauren at Sheffield Hallam called Fathom, that was looking at the Wild Medicine podcast. It was looking at artifacts that we brought from river walks that artists Joanne and Joanne created and then people had engaged with. There's a brilliant story which we won't go into, but the fig trees that grow by the side of the river because of the heat that was pushed out from the factories during the industrial times. Rose did this amazing piece where she went and gathered the figs and turned them into a development fluid to then develop the photographs that she'd taken of the area, and just creating all these wonderful little feedback loops that people can engage with. And then No Bounds, which is a really interesting kind of thing that happens every year in Sheffield, the Flow State exhibition, where Danny and Aaron took all these data feeds from different parts of the river and did some mapping of the surface of the water. And then in a basement where the Don was flowing the other side of the wall in an art gallery, created this projection mapped, fully immersive system. So you come and look at it as a piece of art, and you stand in the darkened basement with all this cool stuff flying around, and you've got the sounds of the station because the Don flows under the station, and you're in the thing experiencing it. And for me, that's some of the most exciting stuff, is not only where it tends to, it's engaging people on a journey where they get this thing where they're not being sold anything, they're not being educated about something, they just experience it and they go, cool, I'm super curious now, tell me more. And then you've got thousands of people on this journey, and where it might go in terms of the imagined futures or
Yeah,
the
that's the
possibilities,
point of emergent futures. If we could
you
tell where it was going, it wouldn't be emergent.
exactly.
So that's so exciting. Sheffield sounds such an alive place, but then what we discover when we go anywhere is that everywhere is alive, right under the surface, with all this astonishing stuff that somehow doesn't quite break through to the mainstream media, so it doesn't feel mainstream yet. I am working on that. We'll talk about that when we're not recording because I have some ideas. I think we need to stop there because we're way over time. Johnny, this has been so exciting and I am so impressed with all you're doing. So definitely we're going to come back and talk again at some point. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming on to the Accidental Gods podcast.
Well, thank you. It's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure. And yeah, I very glad that we met at the SSEN conference and got the
It
chance
was
to chat
grand,
and
wasn't it?
It's come back round full circle. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much.